Welcome to Anthropology of AI, where we explore how technology is reshaping our culture, society, and the human experience. Since its creation, psychoanalysis has been described as an invitation to speak. It's a space where language reveals our conflicts, desires, and patterns that shape how we live. But today we're entering a world where machines can also produce language. They can write, they can respond, they can translate, and they can even simulate a conversation. So, what happens to human subjectivity when language is no longer uniquely human? Today's guest, Florencia Bernthal, is a Lacanian psychoanalyst working at the intersection of the psychoanalysis, creativity, and in artificial intelligence. She works with artists, filmmakers, and innovators to explore how unconscious motivations shape storytelling, shape our identity, and how psychoanalytic thought can help us navigate a technological world. Together, we'll explore desire, creativity, language, what psychoanalysis can teach us about being human in the age of AI. Hi, Florencia. Florencia, welcome. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. We live in an age of posting and prompting, and you are
Yeah.
speaking about the invitation to speak. Why is that distinction so vital right now?
Well, it's a very Freudian thing, although I do not call myself an orthodox Freudian psychoanalyst at all. It is very important what he brought to us. When creating psychoanalysis, he took it very seriously and he was thinking that it needed to be a method, that it was not just an invitation to speak for people to just talk because obviously, and you will probably agree with me, it happens nowadays as well. Like you invite someone to speak and they will just say so many things because we human beings enjoy so much of like just talking. That doesn't mean that we are saying anything meaningful. So sometimes Freud's invitation, even today, is mistaken with, it's just an invitation for people to talk. And people also come to session just spending almost the entire session just talking without saying a word that is meaningful to them. So the invitation to speak is more about just saying whatever comes to mind. And saying whatever comes to mind is important because you're going to probably say something that is surprising you. Like, why am I talking about this? People usually say, like, this is not what I thought I was going to say, or the issues I've been having this week, or the thoughts I've been having this week, or the dream I had last night. This is, I don't know, why am I sharing this with you? And that's precisely what we want is the emergence of the unconscious, something that is coming to surface that wasn't there. So it's not about for how long we can talk, is what are we going to say in that time that is valuable. We are so used to using too many words um, that go nowhere, it's part of the diplomacy of our everyday. You hear discourses all the time everywhere. Yeah, that's the invitation. And I think is very interesting today the way I work as a psychoanalyst because I follow Lacan and what Lacan did with taking this invitation to speak that Freud brought, what he decided was to cut the session. So it's not so much about working by the minutes, seeing the clock ticking until, I have 50 minutes until, this session ends so I can wait and last minute say something important. Lacan would say that in the moment the unconscious was emerging, like he would cut the session right then. And it doesn't matter if it was after 10 minutes or 20 minutes. In France is very, they're used to it. And after 10 minutes, they just cut the session. I wouldn't allow myself to do this here because people, are not used to it. But usually after 40 minutes, it's more than enough because something important has been said.
Yeah. Can you educate me and the audience a little bit more on the concept of what is the meaning of a psychoanalyst? Like, how do you actually work as a psychoanalyst? And what is the specific distinction of the Lacanian psychoanalyst?
So psychoanalysis is a method. Usually, people tend to believe that we are just another branch of psychology, another theory, but the thing is that what really, really makes the decision valuable is that we are not necessarily, the intention is not necessarily to cure in terms of mental health. If mental health, by definition, means that we are restoring the person to previous condition, we don't necessarily want that. So it's not so much about helping someone alleviate symptoms, cope with them, learn how to manage, who they are and live with it, but quite the contrary. Okay, sure, this is who you've been. And obviously, there's something that didn't work because it's bringing tremendous suffering. So the process might be longer, but the idea is to obviously alleviate symptoms at the beginning, but never, not only not restore you to previous condition, or neither help you to live with who you are. It's more about bringing to question who you want to be. Because who you are today, does it belong to you? Is that something that you have decided, or you just followed expectations, ideals, and ideas also of who you were supposed to be based on others' demands, the mother demanding love from the child, it comes from theories like from the very beginning of evolution. But at the same time, what Lacan did with Freudian psychoanalysis was to bring language to, elevating the meaning of language, the meaning of desire. And mostly, and what is most important, at least to me today in my practice and in the way I conduct my life, and it was totally new, was for Lacan to make us understand that we enjoy suffering and that there is a reason why we sustain symptoms, because changing sometimes is so risky, and taking the leap of faith of going to the unknown is too risky. And usually we just decide, unconsciously speaking, to stay where we are because for some reason, although it's inflicting suffering and is problematic, it's also very comfortable.
How do we define suffering in this context?
Hmm.
And then I guess the follow-up question is suffering one of those fundamental human conditions that shape who we are, shape our desires, and ultimately shape our drive to make the society in the way that will reduce suffering or maintain suffering? It sounds like a very critical concept, even just based on what you're saying right now.
Yeah, and controversial because it can go two ways. I'm glad you're asking the question because we connect suffering with, my God, I'm having such a bad time right now. Like, this is horrible. I don't want to live like this anymore. Usually, as human beings, we adapt so well. You, as an anthropologist, you probably know this better than me. Adapt so well to anything that when we get to that point, when we actually say, I cannot live like this any longer, is it's kind of critical. It's kind of too late. Is, that comes in those moments in which someone is, I don't know, submitted to the hospital with, with crisis, or the famous panic attacks, or, certain traumas that come with sometimes, losing a parent, and all of a sudden that absence bringing questions about who we are now without them, things like that. Otherwise, the suffering is just in our everyday life, is here, in the surface. but we don't pay attention to it. And we just continue and continue and continue and continue. How do we experience suffering? Probably by enjoying quite a lot.
As an anthropologist, I always ask myself how much of that is actually influenced by culture. I think a fair question is there an amount of suffering that's actually good or desirable? For instance, I found myself talking to someone the other day and I said something like, I feel like my children don't suffer. My life was a little bit harder because I want them to be more resilient and I want them to know that they can do hard things and they can
Right.
persevere because well one suffering is part of life as you mentioned it's always on the surface it happens through things you can never control it's the grief it's the trauma it's whatever comes your way that you do not expect and you don't necessarily know how to handle but it is such an important part of life that it's inevitable so then almost like with working out, when you break down your muscle as a and you sort of suffer, but then it does bring the next level. So there's something about that like, I try to be a very mindful parent, but I did say to someone like I wish my children would suffer a little bit more sometimes and just go through a little bit more kind of, things that will make them work a little harder, perhaps. Their life seems to be so comfortable these days. Everything is sort of given to you, you're catered to. The whole time is just to go back to, you know, um, the society that we live in today is to alleviate suffering, but sometimes to the point where you create this almost like false notion that you can fully alleviate suffering. And instead, I do wonder if we then create more suffering through that. And I guess the question is like, what is sort of the norm, according to your method and your experience? How should we reconcile, like, almost like this wish to eliminate suffering from the day-to-day life and the actual need for us to be able to, to be resilient in the face of suffering because that is a tension in its own.
Hmm. Is an important question. Should we eliminate it altogether? Or moreover, really know what are we made of? What is that suffering bringing? What it means? Where is it going? And you were mentioning your children and thinking, sure, that's pure psychoanalysis. It's not so much about eliminating or keeping or coping. And if you're not feeling well, okay, breathe and, sure, here's your lollipop. Let's go, It's and let's just continue and continue and continue. I think it's more about as parents also to bring, the tools, to bring the orientation to be able to provide that guidance that will take our children to know more about themselves, to take responsibility, and to know how to solve problems. Because I think that when you're mentioning, hey, I don't think they're suffering enough, everything is so comfortable, it's not so much about, I want my kids to suffer, that obviously we don't want anybody to suffer, but
Right.
we do want people to be aware, not to be naive of who they are, where they're going in life. Why are they doing what they're doing with themselves, with others, what they're doing it for? What is the purpose? What is the point? And going back to the beginning of our conversation, the invitation to speak has to do with that as well. We can be talking for hours, nonsense, and be completely disoriented in a conversation, or we can actually pause and be like, okay, hold on. Let's extract this detail and that detail, and then let's articulate those details in a way that are going to actually allow us to be in front of everyone and have a position in life. And it's getting more and more and more complicated because, yes, culturally, socially, I mean, the market offers so much. So it is so easy to get lost When I talk about suffering, because I really want to go back to also see if I can bring a little bit more of, meaning to that. So I don't want this to get, misunderstood as like, okay, this psychoanalyst promoting suffering and now
And the crazy
not at
no.
all. I love my job, but that's not the point. It is so easy to pinpoint how this is manifesting in addiction, for example, any sort of addiction that you can think of. It can also be about shopping on Amazon. It doesn't have to be, addiction to um, substance but it happens when, I don't know, someone that already lost their home and their family. They're gambling at the casino and they're like, okay, okay, one more. That enjoyment is so solitary, is such a parasite. And the problem with the suffering that, obviously is bringing to someone's life is it's ridiculous. It's almost something that we cannot understand until, we face it. The enjoyment and the suffering took over, that is not me deciding to do something. We have no agency as humans. What is human in us? This is also linked to probably what we may discuss later about the articulations or potential articulations between the human and the machine. What is really human in us? Are we making the decisions, or all this, the market, the culture, the society, the demands from others, whatever it is, it's just, it's an overflow. And the next potential question, I guess, would be how do you identify it? Yeah. And I always say that there's no problem with enjoyment. We all do it. You name your thing. If it is, I don't know, if it is about eating something sugary every day or going to the movies or enjoying, I don't know, just relaxing in the couch and scrolling on your phone, like whatever it is, it's fine. The problem is when we start needing what we want. Usually there's a distance between what we want or what we like and what we actually need. And we mess those two up so badly that we start needing what we want, and then it's a disaster.
So that's the choice, right? In question. And what you were saying about what is the actual human agency and how does that interact with, what we see now in technology, what is being offered to us and striking that balance. I actually want to go back to that, the Lacanian idea and your practice and your methods. So following that tradition, you also write about the fact that language is quite important in that tradition, and it emphasizes language differently than in some other methods and therapies. Can you talk more about how do you see our sort of symptoms? How do they relate to the way that we use or fail to use our language? So, going a little bit deeper in that concept of humans needing painful cycles because of the unconscious conflicts. And can a machine, for example, which sort of lacks an unconscious, ever truly simulate that human interaction and the human response and the personality?
Lacan used to say that language is an apparatus that enjoys itself. So, since we are babies, since the oral stage, like, the baby's moving their mouth and they're just enjoying that. It's so joyful. And then we learn to talk and we just cannot stop, is the way we communicate with others. And we can also express what we want and what we think is so relevant. At the same time, as I was telling you, it can be a problem because the moment, we can say anything, and that's how we express love and we express needs, but we also express enjoyment, and we also, can hurt others with what we say. It happens all the time. There's always going to be a disagreement. There's communication doesn't exist. Lacan used to say, because I'm going to tell you one thing and you're going to listen, the way you're decoding the message and what you are listening, what you get from it is just your perspective, your point of view. So are we ever going to have an agreement? Maybe. But then, we're like, okay, sure, nice to meet you. And then you turn and you're like, sure, but I'll do whatever I want with it? So it is very important to pay attention to language. It's very important to pay attention to where are we really trying to do when we communicate? What are we really trying to get to when we are chatting today with the bot? What do we want? What do we want to hear from it? And why are we so fascinated by it? Is it because we're really getting questioned, or is it because we're hearing what we want to hear? Not sure. If you ask me further about the machine, I think that the machine can do anything today. I have this all the time. I have these conversations with, colleagues and to us. I'm not talking about in the past few years when, we say AI and we all know what we're talking about. 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it was like, what is that? I don't know. And it was a conversation about what was coming and how the threat that was bringing to us practitioners, what is going to happen if the machine can answer to anything, and they can mimic us so well. Like, are we necessary at all? And the answer maybe is that we're not necessary anymore. It's like the conversations with, like the industrial revolutions. It's like, do you need a person there working in a very artisanal way, doing it with their hands, or we put a machine in its place and it's more effective, it's quicker, it's cheaper, done. So, and this is something also very psychoanalytic. The point is not about the necessity, it's about the choice. No, we're not necessarily important, but you still, for some reason, choose to show up. That's what an analysis is about. Is it necessary to be uncomfortable, to know more about ourselves, to really ask ourselves this kind of questions about language, about am I just talking, or am I saying something meaningful? Am I just going with the flow? Do I really, when I'm trying to educate a child in front of the classroom or, at home, are we really passing along the elements that they need to have the tools to solve problems in the future? What do I know? What am I passing to them if I don't even know? Like, is it necessary? No. It's quite an ugly invitation. Like, why would someone would choose to go through a psychoanalytic experience? So I don't know. And that's why I think is so valuable. The machine can do anything right now. I don't think that the problem is within the machine anymore, although we can argue that obviously there's always a problem there. I think that we are the problem because we don't know about our own machinery. What is, as human beings, we know how to behave. We know, maybe we can argue this too, but how to, cope with the rules in society. It I feel even uncomfortable saying that, nowadays in this kind of, in the world, how the world is operating and working today. But let's say we can handle it, right? But do we know what just automatically works within ourselves, just like a machine? So we don't know that, and we are disoriented within our own minds. How are we able to manage this incredible tool, which is the machine, to articulate ourselves to it, to interact with it, to use it the right way, to teach our children how to deal with it? I mean, it's quite concerning. I don't necessarily have all the answers to that, but that is definitely what occupies my mind daily.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think, the meta question here is that I would love to unpack with you is why do humans, it's almost like we have this inherent desire to create
Mhm.
systems for our life, including the technology that will allow us to almost outsource some of that deep thinking analysis and perhaps to make it easier, but perhaps what comes to mind and, definitely as a social scientist, and I'm sure you'll have a perspective on that as a psychoanalyst, is our connection to religion and the religious practice, the rituals that we engage in every day to anchor ourselves to this world, to make sense of suffering, desire, using our language to make those connections and build those bridges. And in a way that these days we all engage with, agents, AI agents, with technology that almost functions as a sort of ritualistic behavior, as a type of religion. Like, hey, give me answers. Because we really do deify information in this day and age. We really deify intelligence as a greater good. And so that almost gives us this idea of being more knowing, more in control, more intelligent even, right? Like people are
Right.
now, it's augmented intelligence. It's not even artificial, it's augmented. It's us humans augmenting ourselves to be better, presumably. But is that a way of our species to almost anchor ourselves into something that is bigger than us, which is very, very similar to religion?
That is that is this incredible. I agree with you. You know, I think that religion and science are two pillars that have been sustaining society and culture like forever, and they're necessary actually. Because without them, how do we answer questions that, about our existence all the time? Then you can choose. You can go with science, you can go with religion, you can blend both. No problem. The issue today is, so going back to that, just to clarify, I believe it's necessary to have them within the foundation of any cultural experience. Then we can question them. Then we can decide how involved, how implicated are we going to be, if we're going to believe actually in science, in religion, or in psychoanalysis. There's also another option. But today, I think that the main question for the human is, what do we believe in, really? Do we believe in AI? Do we believe in where we're going with it? What are the machines living in? The easy answer would be, well, they will believe whatever we tell them to believe in, right? But then if we don't know what to believe in anymore, so you see, to me, it's always on us. We are the ones disorienting the machine, not the machine disorienting us. Machine is just, mechanics. It's not a monster. If we would know how to use it, not only how to use it, if we would be able to understand its limitations, but those limits are not up to the machine. Those limits are within ourselves, when we had enough, what we use it for, what are the things we're going to actually use it for, and what are the things that we're going to have to figure out on ourselves, on our own. What do you think? So curious.
What I've been thinking a lot about lately is the monsters we create and perhaps that is what I meant truly when I was saying about suffering and the kids and just living in this very isolated, very curated space that
Right.
doesn't allow us to see the other worlds, the other perspectives, which in itself can be very dangerous because that is how you create this version of distorted reality that then you sort of cling to, which really makes me think of those examples that you shared earlier about people's addiction. And when, you enjoy something, you value something as a way of life, as a way of spending time, but then it becomes a need and you cling to it. And that is where the monsters hide often. And so I think that going back to that conversation we had about the language and perhaps about, the subconscious of the language, how it then translates into creating the world that can either be a tool, either be like a very useful way to, accelerate some of the things that we do, augment some of the things that we do in a way that's faster, broader, easier, but it can also narrow it in some ways and make it less about the true knowing and more about that need to conform and that confirmation bias and that very narrow space that in turn can create a lot more suffering. Is sort of going from, this idea that people need religion, perhaps not religion as an institution, but even religion as a belief system to make sense of the world. It's as old as the human civilizations. Like, I think there's even some notion in, history and anthropology that refers to a system of beliefs as like a true sort of definition of culture. We have culture when we are collectively sharing a system of beliefs that allows us to understand the world around us. But then it becomes problematic when it's either imposed or very siloed. And then the fear creeps in and it becomes very prevalent to question everything else that falls outside of that system of beliefs. And that is the distinction between sort of a healthy belief system and like something like a cult where, it becomes very controlling, very rigid, and, takes a shape of that monster that can be very destructive and can be quite dangerous. And so going back to our conversation about the machines, I would love to talk to you about, some of the things that I know you've been talking about, you've been writing about, is that subjectivity in technological culture. So what is at stake when we begin operating on machines that produce language? Are we then confusing this intelligence or the ability to process language with understanding the true ability to mean and to really understand the meaning versus just the processing, but more about that subjectivity?
I'll try. And you tell me if, if you feel that perhaps it needs clarification. The same way I told you, I think machines can do anything. Today, I also think that they're for sure smarter than us. Of course, because they can, keep information that I don't remember what I did yesterday, or what I studied in, fourth year at the university. The machine probably would be like, oh, yeah, this is, I know. So here's the question about intelligence. Maybe intelligence is overrated. And maybe it's not about how smart we are. It's like when you were talking about the children, you can be extremely, extremely smart and academically successful. But if you don't know how to light a fire, you know, in the middle of the night in certain situation, well, you may freeze to that, okay, maybe it's not going to be so fun. So there's something that comes with sensitivity that I think that that's where you're taking me to, with the meaning and, what's going on here, subjectivity, like the question that you're bringing, there's something sensitive in us, something that I call with the colleagues I do research with and people I learned so much from. What is the human within the human? What is human in us? Is maybe something, it's a gem, it's something precious, it's something tiny that we don't even acknowledge, that we don't even know is there. But in certain moments in life comes up, and then we go back to normal. again, because it's more comfortable and it's safer, and it is just what we need to do. And I'm not going to take care of this, and this is urgent. However, I think that's the key, because that's the only thing that the machine can have. What is that human thing within yourself? That thing that is not automatic, that is not about just continuing or saying the right thing, or, being correct in your answers, or smart enough in your answers, or delivering properly. What's that? What is that about? Almost, this is also very Freudian. Freud called it, it's ominous. Like when you look at yourself in the mirror and you try to look at yourself in the eye, and there's something there that is familiar, but you don't recognize it at the same time. What is that about? Who's that stranger in there? But there's something in essence that obviously gets lost, that obviously we don't know what it's about, that sometimes in analysis we just need to get to find it, and sometimes we don't find it because we never had it, and we need to produce it. And that's the only thing that makes us hopefully different. That's why I'm so interested now lately in working with creators, creatives, people that dedicate their lives to photography, to art, to filmmakers, and actor, like people that have this flexibility, but also have decided to work with that sensitivity more and do something with it for living. I think that there's a lot of material there, not as a salvation, not as a, in the film industry, they also use AI, and, and scriptwriters, they also adapt books, using the tools that we have today, to make it sound a certain way, to enrich the vocabulary. But that's when I come in. Okay, but what do you think about what this person is saying here? What is this person coming from? Where is this person at in their lives? Where is this person going with their doing? Again, purpose. Like what is coming and going, that everything is so now, cameras on, and all you get is that scene. But it is so, what makes you cry, when you watch a movie that is something that is actually moving you, a piece of art that is talking to you, and you identify yourself with it, it has to do with that piece of art being able to touch something within you that takes you to who you really are. I don't know if the machine can do that, at least not on its own.
Bingo. I think that's the key. That is the ultimate reflection of what we're creating as a mirror. So in a way, that's the ultimate art. AI
Right.
is the ultimate art form. Technology is the ultimate art form of our society. But we need to recognize the role of the artist in it and understand where that plays in the art form, how it manifests itself. So many other topics that I would love to discuss with you. There's this whole conversation I would love to have with you about the children and growing up in this digital era, something that is very new to this generation. And I feel like even like for millennials, or
Yes.
it was still slightly different. I think Gen Alpha is now completely and fully immersed in the space of, automation of many things that were not yet automated even, a decade ago. So I would love to have like a separate conversation about it with you.
I love that. It is very important, especially I think that the breaking point, or at least it serves the purpose as an excuse, what happened during the pandemic, how rapidly we needed to adapt our children to using technology more, to be able to attend to school, to be able to learn, to be able to interact with others. And then when the pandemic was over, we needed for them to go back to normal. And then we came to realize that, as I was sharing with you at the beginning of our conversation, there's no way of going back.
There's no
Restoring ourselves to previous condition is
Yeah.
impossible because we had already that bug implanted in us. Like you couldn't take the device from your child anymore. So then we needed to adapt again and learn how to blend those two worlds together. And those kids that during the pandemic were 2, 3, 4 year olds, they're now finishing elementary school. And I don't know, they're part of different worlds that
Yeah.
I'm not sure we entirely grasp and understand. But it is so relevant that we are on top of it if we are the adults bringing orientation to their lives as well.
We should talk
So,
about it. Yeah.
yes,
We should have a separate conversation about it. But for this one, I really thank you. It was super interesting to talk.
amazing.
Always, always a delight, Florencia.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I will leave in the description the link to your website and anything you want to share with the audience.
Amazing.
And thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Such a
My
pleasure.
pleasure.